What's up, fellas? In today's video, we are continuing our NBA historic redraft series. If you've missed the first couple of these, I'm going throughout NBA history, beginning with the 2003 NBA draft and going through and redrafting all of these, but also considering how the redraft would impact the future of the NBA. I am doing a ranking of these players in the order in which I felt like they should have been drafted based off how good their careers were, and then we're kind of following that thread and seeing how NBA history would have been affected. If you're new here, what's up? My name's Starker. You can sub to the channel down below. I upload twice a day, every day. It's a great place for consistent NBA content. And if you're enjoying the video, leave a like rating, please. It doesn't take very long. It helps to get the video out to more people on YouTube. And you can also check me out at various socials at the bottom of the screen. They're in a link tree down in the description below. With that said, let's go and begin with the first overall pick. And this is held by the Milwaukee Bucks. I don't think that there's an argument here. Initially, it was Andrew Bogut. In the redraft, it's going to be Chris Paul. Milwaukee made the playoffs the following year with Andrew Bogut. And Bogut was really good as a rookie, but Chris Paul is better as a rookie, makes a bigger impact, and raises their ceiling significantly. And him and Michael Redd are a really, really nice backcourt there moving forward in Milwaukee. Now, given the market of the Milwaukee Bucks, the smaller market, it's pretty likely that a handful of years into his career, Chris Paul ends up requesting a trade just like he did when he was in New Orleans. But things go differently here, and this is the first big change in the NBA as a result of this redraft, and there are a lot of them throughout this video. Presumably, Chris Paul still wants to get moved, and the LA Lakers actually end up with Chris Paul. Here's why. Initially, that Chris Paul to the Lakers trade from New Orleans was vetoed because the NBA basically owned the New Orleans franchise at the time. Like, there was some money issues there, and essentially, the NBA was in charge of the decisions of that team, and as a result, David Stern vetoed that trade that would have sent Chris Paul to the Lakers because he didn't like the trade package. They ultimately ended up accepting the package from the Clippers. Now, that will not be the case here in Milwaukee. They have their own owners, and presumably they would accept that Lakers trade package, and Chris Paul becomes an LA Laker if he is drafted number 1 overall in 2005, as he should have been at the time. So starting off with some big changes here already in this draft. We move on now to the second overall pick held by the Atlanta Hawks. Initially, they selected Marvin Williams. In the redraft, they're going to select Darren Williams, a very, very, very good player. For some reason, his career just completely dropped off a cliff there at the end, but Darren Williams is a really, really good guard here to get at number 2 overall. Interestingly, the Hawks desperately needed a point guard, not only in this draft, but in the next couple of years, they desperately needed a point guard, and the top 2 players in this class ended up being point guards, and they selected a forward. Now, this doesn't really change a ton for them moving forward as a franchise in Atlanta. Maybe they end up being a little bit better, maybe they end up being better a little bit quicker because Williams is there, and then they end up, they have Joe Johnson, Josh Smith at this point. Maybe that actually helps them down the road. But the more interesting stuff is the fact that Williams does not end up in Utah as we get to our next pick. So Darren Williams, that is, goes to Atlanta. Number 3, Danny Granger is going to go to Utah. And we can talk about, the fit of Granger. It's kind of weird because, the Jazz really need that point guard to make the Jerry Sloan offense work. They've already got Kirilenko, Boozer, Okur, and they add another forward to that in Danny Granger. So that's a little bit weird, but the most important detail here is the fact that Darren Williams is no longer in Utah and he is in Atlanta. And assuming that things still don't go well in Atlanta and Darren Williams eventually requests a trade, does the Billy King stuff still happen? Does Atlanta still like the trade package that the Nets eventually end up offering? I would assume that they would, because one of the main pieces in that trade was Derek Favors, who was the 3rd pick in the draft. He goes to Georgia Tech. He's literally right down the road from where the Atlanta Hawks play, and they're probably all in on Derek Favors as well. So if it comes down to it and Williams wants to leave, Darren Williams probably still ends up in Brooklyn. But if that doesn't happen, does all the Billy King stuff still happen? Like, let's just say that Darren Williams goes to Atlanta, loves it, is a career Hawk. Does all the other Billy King stuff still happen if Darren Williams never goes to Brooklyn? Because remember, they get Williams first, and then they make all the crazy trades that they need to make down the road, whether it be giving up the pick to get Gerald Wallace, that pick ends up becoming Damian Lillard, or the picks and the pick swaps going to Boston for KG and Paul Pierce that end up becoming Brown and Tatum and all this other stuff. Does any of that other Billy King stuff happen, whether it be Dame ending up in Portland or all the Boston stuff, if they never get Darren Williams in the first place? If Darren Williams never becomes unhappy in Utah and he's happy in Atlanta, I'm not convinced that any of that Billy King stuff happens, which is a wild, wild change of events to consider. Having said that, we move on now to number 4 overall, the New Orleans Hornets. Originally, they get Chris Paul, who ends up being the best player in the class. In this case, they end up with the guy who initially went number 1 overall, and it's Andrew Bogut. Andrew Bogut is a really, really good NBA player. had some injury issues, but when healthy was one of the best defensive bigs in the league, a really good passer as well. And, this creates a nice little front court with David West and Andrew Bogut. Obviously, the ceiling is significantly lower without Chris Paul there and with Bogut there. Not really a ton of changes here with the exception of the eventual Bogut trade to Golden State, which we'll get to a little bit later when we get to the Warriors pick. And the only other thing here is that the Hornets 2 years after this would trade for Tyson Chandler. It's unlikely that trade goes down if they already have Andrew Bogut in place there. So Tyson Chandler likely stays in Chicago initially and then ends up somewhere. Or does he go from, it's either Charlotte or Chicago, or whatever the case may be. Tyson Chandler's career is different as a result of Andrew Bogut being in New Orleans here. Next up now, number 5 is Charlotte. They originally selected Raymond Felton. Raymond Felton's not going to go 5th overall in this class. I'm going to go with Andrew Bynum. This might be a controversial one, but if you want to go strictly based off the peak of Andrew Bynum's career, he was really, really good. And this is actually a really, really good fit in Charlotte because they need a big, they need an offensive focal point, right? Like they've got Boris Diaw, they've got Gerald Wallace, they've got Raja Bell. It's not a great team, but they need someone that can be the number one offensive guy. And of course, it takes a little bit for Bynum to get there because he is so young. But by the time Bynum gets to his peak, he's exactly what this Charlotte team needs and is a really, really good offensive option for them. They get a guard or two here down the road. Charlotte could be really, really good. Obviously, things tail off quickly with Bynum, but still something to consider. As this affects, the rest of the league here, obviously Bynum initially ended up going to LA with, I believe, the 10th pick. And him not being in LA, as we'll get to later, impacts some Dwight Howard stuff down the road as well. I'm telling you, there are so many trade things to consider within this redraft. Next up now, number 6, Portland. I'm going to give them David Lee. That's just where I think the correct ranking is. David Lee's a good player, had a nice long career. Originally, they selected Martell Webster, so their team gets better in the initial stages of this. All that really matters is do they end up flipping Gerald Wallace for the pick that becomes Dame in 2012, because that is the best move that this franchise makes, moving forward. And as long as that still happens, this 6th pick doesn't really matter. If, as we mentioned earlier, they don't end up getting the Dame pick because the Nets don't end up moving for Gerald Wallace because they never get Darren Williams, then that changes some things, okay? So that's really the only thing that matters here for Portland is does the Dame pick end up actually happening. Next up now, Toronto, number 7 overall. I'm going to give them Lou Williams. They originally selected Charlie Villanueva. Doesn't really mean much, honestly. If you want to argue that Williams should have gone to Portland at 6, that's fine. But this is basically just about the re-ranking here, and Williams is going to go 7. Number 8 now, the New York Knicks. Originally selected Channing Frye, who had a fine career. I'm going to give them Monte Ellis, a really, really good scorer in his prime, albeit undersized. And again, as this affects Golden State, who we'll get to with the next pick, Ellis is not in Golden State, who was originally flipped for Andrew Bogut, who was on a couple of title teams there in Golden State, which is very, very critical. Now we get to number 9 overall, the Golden State Warriors. I keep teasing the Warriors and the Lakers, and we're finally here, okay? The Warriors are going to select Raymond Felton here, who's a nice guard, not as good as Monte Ellis, as, evidenced by the fact that he is behind Ellis in this redraft. And what this calls into question is, presuming they still go and get Steph Curry in 2009 and they want to make a move and they want to go get a big, they want to go get Andrew Bogut, is Raymond Felton a high enough value player, assuming he's still on the roster, to be flipped straight up for Bogut? Probably not. They have to throw in some extra stuff, making potentially down the road their rebuild and their franchise slightly worse, and maybe not even a championship team, just because they have to give up extra stuff in addition to Felton. Presumably, they do still end up with Bogut, but something to consider there for Golden State. Number 10 now, the LA Lakers originally selected Andrew Bynum. I'm going to give them Marvin Williams. I know that seems strange because there are some good players still left on the board here, but Williams has had a nice long career. He's a nice complimentary option at the 4 spot, has really turned his career around within the last couple of seasons. I'm going to give the Lakers Marvin Williams. And of course, the fact that they don't have Andrew Bynum means that the Dwight Howard trade eventually that lands Dwight in LA is certainly called into question because Bynum goes to Philly in that deal, Iggy goes to Denver, Dwight goes to LA, all kinds of different stuff happens. It's a crazy, crazy deal. Without Bynum, are they able to make that Dwight trade? And they're presumably giving up assets in this Chris Paul trade as well, because now, remember, they're ending up with Chris Paul in this redraft as a result of a trade later down the road because David Stern does not veto the trade, further limiting their assets to then go and get Dwight Howard down the road. So Dwight, I guess he ends up in Brooklyn. I don't know. The Dwight situation is very, very different. Maybe he stays in Orlando because there is no promise of him potentially getting to LA via trade because they don't have the assets because A, they don't have Andrew Bynum, and B, they gave up assets to get Chris Paul. So if you're a Lakers fan, tons and tons of things happening here within this redraft. We're going to speed through the last couple of picks because it doesn't really affect the long-term future of the league, but I do want to get all the way to 15 in the redraft. Number 11, Orlando. I'm going to give them Marcin Gortat, which is funny because they ended up with Gortat initially anyway. Nice backup big to Dwight Howard. Nothing really to say here for Orlando other than the fact that Marcin Gortat's a nice player. 12, the Clippers end up with Jarrett Jack. Helps them score a little bit. 13, Charlotte ends up with Channing Frye as opposed to Sean May. Sean May did literally nothing in the NBA. Channing Frye provides them some nice floor spacing, which is good for them. 14, Minnesota gets Nate Robinson as opposed to Rashad McCants. Nice player, dunk contest champion, can really score in bunches. He goes 14, and then 15 to New Jersey is going to be Gerald Green, who of course has some issues, bounces around. The fact that he's not in Boston impacts the potential KG trade, as does everything to this point. We talked about in a previous redraft the fact that Al Jefferson does not end up in Boston in that redraft impacts the potential Kevin Garnett trade. And now Boston ends up without Kevin Garnett and without without Al Jefferson and without Gerald Green, making it even more difficult to eventually put that package together that lands them Kevin Garnett. But New Jersey ends up with Gerald Green. So that's the full 2005 redraft, and this one was a head spinner. There are so many different little things as it relates to these teams at the top, because so many of these teams are movers and shakers down the road, whether it be the fact that both Darren Williams and Chris Paul, the two best players in this entire class, get moved in big time altering trade packages down the road. The fact that Andrew Bogut gets moved as well, the fourth best player in this class, is a significant part of a championship team or a couple of championship teams and is involved in a trade. Andrew Bynum being involved in one of the biggest and craziest trades that we've seen in recent memory with that Dwight trade. All the Monta Ellis thing not going to Golden State. There are so many different angles to look at, and hope you guys enjoyed the video. As I said in the beginning, my name is Tucker. Hope you guys have an awesome rest of your day. If you're looking for consistent content, this is a great place to be. You can sub to the channel, you can like the video, and you can check me out at various socials at the bottom of the screen. With all those things said, hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you all next time.